Guys, it's Thanksgiving week, and today we're going to talk about should you use a 401k to purchase that next home?
You better get fired up.
Guys, happy Monday. Lissette, how you doing?
I'm awesome. How are you, Joe?
It's Thanksgiving week, so I'm doing pretty good. My tummy's already grumbling, waiting for that turkey dinner, man.
I'm excited.
I hear you. So today we're going to talk about 401ks, and really we're going to get a couple investments that you can utilize the cash from to purchase a home. The question isn't can you, the question is, does it make sense and what are the rules of the game? So today we're going to go over some of those different rules of the game. We'll tell you some pros and some cons. But at the end of the day, I'll tell you, neither one of us are professionals at whether or not you should use a 401k. I would say talk to your accountant, talk to your financial advisor, run the math is the biggest one, right? There are some people will say, do not do it. It's dumb. Some will say you need to buy no matter what. I will say this. If you've run the math and you know that it makes sense or does not make sense, based on math, I think you've done a great job. If you haven't, I say forget all the recommendations that you've heard, including the ones that myself and Lissette are about to give you, right? So run that math. Lissette, why don't you kick us off? Tell us a little bit about some of the different options, the pros and cons, and just whether or not really it's a good decision.
I think that's a great point that you just made right off the top is just running the math and knowing, do the numbers work for you? And I think whenever I get presented this question, first of all, my first instinct is, well, what age group are you in? If you're younger, maybe you have a little bit more time on your side to save up for retirement. And this is what you need the funds for. This is what you need to get it to the next level in your life that you want to do is purchase that home, which is also going to be a great investment and can be used towards retirement. Yeah. If you're a little bit older and maybe a little bit cautious, but maybe you are older, maybe you already have the savings, and maybe you use these funds you know you won't need for retirement, and this is what you need it for, is to purchase your next property, maybe your forever home. So that's at first why I'm a little bit more cautious. And then I always tell my clients, definitely sit down with their financial advisors, discuss the pros and cons. What tax repercussions are you going to face if you do pull out these funds? Does the pro outweigh the cons? Can you avoid mortgage PMI? Can you avoid that if you put a little bit more money down and that requires you to pull this money out of your 401k? So I definitely just running the numbers and sitting down with someone that's an expert on the pros and cons and the tax problems you may face in the future if you do that.
Yeah, all great points. And, Lissette had mentioned PMI or MIP, very similar thing. What that is mortgage insurance. It's essentially saying if you've got 20% down, right? So on a $500,000 property, you got 100 grand down. On a 400, you got 80 down. We're pretty confident as a bank, you're going to make your payments. Our risk is lower, so we're not going to require any additional payments, right? However, if you've got 3%, 5%, whatever, something less than 20% down, now we're taking on a little bit of risk that we're not comfortable with. So we're going to add what's called mortgage insurance. And that really helps kind of pad the profits to make up for the losses that we know we're going to have, right? They know they're going to have a certain level of losses. That's a higher number with less than 20% down than they will with buyers who put 20% down. So that's what that is. So again, looking at the math, it's not just does it make sense to pull it out or not? It's also, what am I saving? And if you're able to go from 10 or 15% down to 20% down, and you can save on that mortgage insurance, that might make up for it right there. So phenomenal point. Some of the research that I did, and again, you're going to want to talk to a professional. Take what I say with a grain of salt. If anything you're hearing doesn't make sense, whether it just doesn't make sense, you don't get it, or you are a professional and you're saying, no, that's not how it works, feel free to put it in the comments. I'd love to hear your feedback. But on a 401k, here's some of the rules of the game, right? Normally, you've got to wait until you're 59 and a half to pull out any money. However, if you're purchasing a first-time home, and a home could be a first-time home, or it could be a home, like you haven't had a homestead property in 2 years, you can pull it out with certain rules attached without any penalties or taxes, right? So you can do either a loan or a withdrawal. A loan means you're going to pay it back to yourself, right? It's a great person to pay it back to. Or a withdrawal means I'm not going to pay it back. You can do either or. If you're going to do a loan, there's no taxes or penalties, right? That loan is typically over 5 years, or I should say up to 5 years. But if it's on a primary residence, you can request longer, and in many cases, they'll give it to you, right? So you're going to pay interest based on what that 401k program tells you. but you'll know that interest rate before you say yes or no. So you know the rules of the game. But that is one thing I'd want to get from them. I'd want to also get from them what those monthly payments are going to look like before you make your decision. Because again, if there's anything I'm pushing, it's do the math. Well, that's part of your math, right? If you're taking a withdrawal, you're going to have taxes on earnings, and then that money cannot go back in. So for me, if I'm going to use whatever it is, say $10,000, I personally would want to take it out as a loan. Yeah, the negative is I got to pay myself back, and that's a monthly fee. However, I can now get that money back in, right? Because every year you've got limits on how much you can put in. I got a 401k. I think this year's limit is 22,500. Next year it's 23 grand. So let's say I take out a $10,000 withdraw. Next year I can only put 23 grand in. I can't put that 10 grand back in if I have it. But if I take it as a loan, I can put the 23 grand in next year plus that $10,000, right? So it's a great way to open up how much I can put back in there. So that's important to know too. So you're going to want to really strategize with this on how you do it. So taxes on earnings. If you put 8 grand in and it grew to 10, then when you pull out that 10, you're not going to pay taxes on the 8. You're going to pay taxes on the 2, which is the growth. All right. How much of a loan can you pull? The lesser of two numbers, 50 grand or, and this is another or, 10 grand or half the vested amount. So if you've put, let's say, $70,000 into your account and it's grown to 100, and you can either pull out the lesser of 50 grand or 10 grand, which 10 grand is lower, or half the vested amount, which is 70 grand. Half of that is 35. So I can go with a $35,000 loan, right? So that's how the rules work. Again, this is a conversation you're going to want to have with your accountant and your financial advisor, but those are the amounts you can pull out. That's a pretty substantial amount. So if you've got even 10 grand, 20 grand in your 401k, there's a lot of options here. Now, IRAs are pretty similar, a little bit different. I didn't see as many rules. I read the word penalty while I was saying rules. As many rules. So you can pull out up to $10,000 penalty free again if it's a first time purchase or if you have not had a homestead property in the last 2 years. If it's traditional, you've already paid taxes, so you don't have to worry about paying more taxes. If it's a Roth, there's two things, right? Again, you got to pay taxes on the earnings. And second, there's a 5-year rule. This is why I always, when I was in the Army, I pushed all my soldiers to get the Roth right away. You got $5, start a Roth with it today. Why? Because that 5-year rule starts ticking as soon as you start that account. So if you ever want to pull out of that account, you can do so penalty free with a bunch of exceptions if it's been at least 5 years. So I always say, hey, maybe you want, right? A lot of advisors will tell you you've got to have 6 months of expenses, excuse me, in your savings account. So if you're living off 2 grand a month times 6, that's $12,000. That's a lot of money to sit in a savings account making $0. Maybe I'm comfortable having 5 grand in my savings account and putting that other 7 into my IRA if I know I can pull it out if I absolutely need it in an emergency situation. Now, over the years, that emergency situation may never happen. It never has for me. And I can rack up that annual average return on investment on that money, right? That's a big deal. So that's good to know too. Last thing I'll throw out there is you've got real estate. You can do cash out refis, home equity line of credits, which are called HELOCs, a lot of different options to get into that home. But again, the math really matters. If there's anything I can push you to do on both sides, I've seen both sides make mistakes. I've seen people who say, I got to get into a house. I'm just going to get into a house. Let's do it. And they'll make a decision that if we run the math, didn't make sense. There was a smarter way to do it, or maybe buying wasn't the right answer. I see other people who say, I'm not going to take out of my investment accounts. It never makes sense. But if we run the math, I can show you how, in some circumstances, it absolutely makes sense. So again, I'll tell you the same thing I'd tell my kids, run the math. Do it with a professional. Don't lean on yourself. I wouldn't. I'm a pretty sharp guy. I love this stuff. I'm addicted to it. But I'm going to lean on my accountant and my financial advisor to tell me if it's a smart decision or not. Was that any final thoughts for our listeners out there?
And put us, your agent, in contact with your financial advisor. Maybe they have questions on the purchase of this property. What is the potential of this property of gaining value over time? Is it maxed out at the top of the market and probably not going to be too much, of an investment opportunity for you? Maybe that outweighs your pro of taking the money out. So if we're able to discuss this with your financial advisor, and then maybe we can see the whole picture and how this plays into your financial future, it will help also making that right decision.
Beautifully said. Guys, appreciate you joining us. If you've got comments even after the video is over, or you've got ideas for future videos, feel free to leave it in the comments and we will absolutely help you out. I appreciate you. Have a great Thanksgiving and we'll talk to you next time.
Have a great one, guys.